counteroffensive is imminent, or maybe already happening. Good afternoon, this is Henry Keane on the UATV channel, bringing the hard truth in easy terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. Today, against the backdrop of Ukraine's preparations for a counteroffensive, the 11th meeting in the Ramstein format will take place. Exactly 1 year ago, the first meeting of defense ministers of allied countries took place. It is important that today's meeting will be held face-to-face, which means that in addition to official negotiations, there will also be backroom conversations, and any diplomat would have agreed that very often the most important and heated discussions take place in the backrooms and coffee breaks in between official sessions and statements.
Ramstein begins. Today we mark the 1-year anniversary of this format. On the agenda are an analysis of what's been done, our strategy for 2023, current needs of the armed force, and the distribution of assistance programs to all divisions of Ukraine's defense forces. We feel the support of our partners, and we continue to strive for victory. Alexei Reznikov, Minister of Defense of Ukraine, on Twitter.
Before the meeting, the participating parties already, as usual, announced new packages of military aid to Ukraine. This time, the Netherlands and Denmark announced the delivery of 14 German-made Leopard 2 tanks, in addition, by the way, to the previously announced 100 Leopard 1 tanks. However, they can be delivered only at the beginning of 2024, and the United States announced another $325 million package, which included ammunition for HIMARS artillery systems and artillery shells. According to the Pentagon's announcement, Ramstein-11 participants will discuss the war in Ukraine in general and coordinate further deliveries of means necessary to protect against the ongoing aggression of the Russian Federation.
Now, at today's contact group meeting, we'll focus on 3 key issues: air defense, ammunition, and enablers. And Ukraine urgently needs our help to shield its citizens and infrastructure and forces from Russia's missile threat. We reject Putin's grim vision of a world where tyrants get to assault their peaceful neighbors and try to impose self-declared spheres of influence at gunpoint. Together, we will defend the rules-based international order that keeps us all secure. And together, we will support Ukraine for as long as it takes.
Kyiv's priorities for Ramstein-11 include air defense systems and ammunition for them, deliveries of armored vehicles and shells for artillery, modern fighter jets and long-range missiles. President Volodymyr Zelensky said the other day that he expects from the new Ramstein thorough decisions that will correspond to rather ambitious prospects on the battlefield. He emphasized that the Allies should now be as active as possible in providing weapons and ammunition in order to speed up the victory over the Russian Federation. In addition, Zelensky reminded that Ukrainian soldiers are literally buying time for partners' procrastination in terms of ammunition with their very lives. Ukrainians' priorities are also the rapid creation of multi-level anti-craft and anti-missile defense systems. Modern jet fighters are needed ASAP.
Checked the combat position of the Patriot air defense system on one of the directions. Thanks our anti-aircraft fighters who completed their training much earlier than planned it. Thanks to partners and everyone who contributed. Also in small numbers. In fact, we already have modern Western anti-aircraft missile systems: NASAMS, IRIS-T, Patriot, SEMPT-T, Krotale, Jeopard and others. In order for the puzzle of a promising Ukrainian air defense to be finally completed, the Air Force needs an F-16. Let's hold the sky and wait for good news from Ramstein. Mykola Oleszczuk, Commander of the Air Force of the Armored Force of Ukraine, on Facebook.
Amen. It should be well understood that the Ramstein format is a meeting at which, in essence, decisions that have already been adopted by the governments of the participating parties are announced. Approval of the supply of this or that weapon is influenced by its cost and availability, of course, complexity of maintenance and internal political factors. And we are already used to the fact that the results of the summit affect the balance of forces in only a few months. For example, the delivery of the Patriot system was announced in January, but we received it only this week. The more air defense anti-missile systems are there to cover our cities and critical infrastructure, the more systems can be freed up to cover our troops. MIG's Patriots and other weaponry will expand our capabilities and complicate the task for the enemy. This is very bad news for the Russians, which is very good for Ukraine. Therefore, The 11th meeting in the Ramstein format is important in view of the preparation of the counteroffensive of the armed forces. And very soon it will become known what new steps the members of the anti-Kremlin coalition are ready to take in helping Ukraine. The European Commission will brief EU ambassadors on the content of a new package of sanctions against Russia this Friday, reporting Politico, citing 4 unnamed diplomats. Politico has stated that the European Commission and EU countries are preparing the next package of sanctions against Russia this week. Germany has already asked for the nuclear energy to be included in the package. But all-time favorite Kremlin partner Hungary has previously promised it will oppose any restrictions on Russian nuclear power. Well, they did not even need to say that. Who would ever doubt? On the other hand, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said earlier that the next package of sanctions would focus on combating circumvention of previous sets of sanctions and fixing loopholes in them. Early Bloomberg, with reference to source in the European Commission, reported that the European Commission plans to create a special intergovernmental body to strengthen control over compliance with sanctions against Russia. I would advise to include Ukrainian special forces into that special body. Trust me, the loophole will be treated very properly. According to journalists, however, the project to strengthen sanctions control will start in June. It will aim to find and close gaps in sanction lists and improve coordination between European national governments. Call it a hunt. Within the framework of the hunt, it is a plan to create structures that will be responsible for certain areas. Freezing of assets, for example, exchanging of best practices and improvement of compliance with sanctions measures.
Никогда на самом деле в истории мира.
In the history of the world, there are no such a number of sanctions being applied so quickly and so intensively as against Russia right now. Accordingly, the system of monitoring and control over the implementation of sanctions wasn't adopted to such an intensive use of them. This is all being rebuilt very quickly, but not so easy on wartime. And this process continues, and I think that everything will be fine, and the trend of circumventing sanctions will not continue for a long time.
Our Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba has a question, although. He slammed the EU for failing to deliver on an ammo plan. A spat over how to implement joint purchasing has slowed down the bloc's efforts to deliver more shells to Kyiv.
The inability of the EU to implement its own decision on the joint procurement of ammunition for Ukraine is frustrating. This is a test of whether the EU has strategic autonomy in making new crucial security decisions. For Ukraine, the cost of inaction is measured in human lives. Dmytro Kuleba, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, on Twitter.
As very aptly noted by Politico, Kuleba mentioned whether the bloc really has strategic autonomy, which is a favorite term used by French President Emmanuel Macron when he recently sparked controversy by saying that Europe should not become America's followers. EU leaders agreed last month on the idea to band together and draw money from a communal pot to help deliver Kyiv up to 1 million shells in the next 12 months as Ukraine fights off Russia's invasion. It is not about technology or money. Europe has both in abundance. Hard to believe, but the issue is purely economical. The negotiations have hit an impasse at the ambassador's level over how to spend the €1 billion set aside for joint contracts. The main point of the contention in the ammunition purchase talks revolves around how much to restrict the money to EU manufacturers and whether to include companies in place like the US and United Kingdom. France has been leading the charge to keep the money within the bloc. Also, others, including Poland, fear that Europe's defense industry may not be up to the task of delivering 1 million shells to Ukraine in the promised time frame of 12 months. Well, maybe what European senior officials really have to do to resolve the issue is to bring their families to Kyiv. Something tells me the ammunition will be delivered right away. Every now and then we hear voices from around the world urging peace talks between Russia and Ukraine and calling for an immediate ceasefire. These voices ignore the bare fact that Russia has shown no genuine interest in engaging in good faith talks or in putting a stop to the fighting. Russia may be saying it wants the war to end, but that means nothing without ordering commanders on the ground to end the actual assaults. That simple, yes. No country in the world desires peace more than Ukraine. But we also know that real peace needs to be just and durable. We need real peace, not appeasement.
Життя – це найвища цінність.
Life is of the highest value, peace is of the highest value, and the greatest means is to launch aggression against another nation and wage bandits' war. Can Ukraine stop resistance Russia's aggressions? No, because then we will lose our life. And it's not just about something abstract. Those for whom life is worth nothing came to our land. Russian soldiers fight at hundreds of cars with people who wanted to flee hostilities right on the roads. They created torture chambers in each of our cities that Russia managed to capture. These were usually basements where people were tortured for weeks and months. Russian soldiers took whole villages hostage, all the inhabitants, and when they killed some and others went to bury them, sometimes those others were also shot.
Ukraine's vision of the path to peace is both realistic and specific. President Zelensky outlined it in his peace formula, and we urge all nations to support specific points of the formula aimed at restoring peace in areas where Russia has shattered it. Our approach to peace initiatives, put forward by different countries and leaders, is very simple. Any effort aimed at restoring Ukraine's internationally recognized borders, which have been violated by Russian aggression, is welcomed. Any effort that violates this principle, such as suggesting Ukraine make territorial concessions, for example, will be rejected. We have never sought this war, and we seek nothing more than what we are entitled to under international law and the UN Charter. This is a realistic and rightful demand, and there is nothing too much about it. Real peace means restoring the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine. Real peace means a safe homeland for the Crimean Tatar people in the Ukrainian Crimea. Real peace means grain ships, not warships, in the Black Sea. And real peace means a world united under the rule of international law. This is not only in Ukraine's interest, but also in the interests of the whole world and Europe. If the history of the past century and the past decades is to teach us anything, it is that the world needs the real peace, not appeasement. And now a minute of righteous evil. Both erroneously and ironically, Russian missile from the Russian jet fighter has hit the Russian city of Belgrade. Take a look at that. The Kremlin acknowledges that and is bragging about the very fact of acknowledgement, like this is so mature and responsible to acknowledge their own mistake. Well, what about this then? It was written "deti", meaning children in Russian, and it was written in Russian so Russian pilots can read it. Nevertheless, a Russian missile hits the target. Children die. But that is okay. Who in Russia cares about Ukrainian children, right? Being put in easy terms, this is all you need to know, folks, about Russian culture. You see, they choose when to be human and when to be Russian. It's quite convenient, isn't it? This is called cultural discretion. Russian cultural discretion. It works like this. When you can't be human for obvious reasons of mass killings, genocide, children murder and deportation, you just become Russian and you do not acknowledge any of the crimes. When you shell hits own land, but luckily kills no one, it is safe to be a mature, responsible human. You know, those Russians do that all the time. They switch the concepts. Their culture becomes human or Russian depending on the context of events. But you can't invade another country and say it is because they hate Tchaikovsky. You can't kill children and say this is because they should be speaking Russian. You can't rape women and then say Nabokov said us to. You can't be damn monster shelling Ukraine on the eve of great Christian Passover and then say, damn man. Well, you can, but then don't be surprised. The world won't call you human. It will call you Russian instead. It was Henry Keane on UATV State Channel breaking hard truth in easy terms. Ask your questions about the war in Ukraine and we will voice your name and answer your question in our next air for the whole free world directly from Ukraine on this very Sunday weekly wrap-up. Stay safe and tune for more.